I'm Tom from Looney Labs, and I'm going to be showing you how to play Star Trek Chronotrek. This is a time travel game set in the Star Trek universe. It's based off of our original time travel game, Chrononauts, and it uses a similar engine, but every single card in here is a reference to something in the Star Trek universe. Everything from the original series all the way through Star Trek Enterprise is in here somewhere, including like all the original movies, and even the animated series gets represented a little bit. So when you set up the game, you're going to want to start by setting up your timeline. This is everything that we would think of as Star Trek canon, and it's easy to set up with the time indexes that are on it. In the bottom left corner, you'll see a little A1, B1, B2, B3. That'll show you how to keep everything in order and set up nicely each time you play. There are, of course, years listed on them as well, and it would be in chronological order, but that way you have a little bit of choice. Once you get it set up, you're going to want to familiarize yourself a little bit with the timeline, just as a matter of what is where. I'll show you some of those important differences. You've got a couple different types of cards on the timeline. There are linchpins. These are the purple cards, and these are the very important events in history that we're going to be altering. When you alter a linchpin, it's going to have an effect on different ripple points, which are the light blue cards on the timeline. And when you're playing the game, you're going to be playing cards that are going to flip over linchpins. For example, if you look at 2257, we see that Kirk rigs the Kobayashi Maru. If we change that event in history, it gets flipped over to its red side. When you flip a linchpin, it shows you which events are going to change at that time. So this shows B8 and C2. Those are the ripple points that are going to be affected. So you can take those and flip them over, and you'll notice that the timeline or the pictures will match up for them. If we go to C2, you can see it's got a red picture of the Enterprise, and same thing, it gets flipped over, and it will get flipped back if either one of these linchpins gets back to its black side. So linchpins start out purple with the black icons. When you flip them over, they go red, their icons turn red, and there's a little hatch mark on them that denotes those are the alternate histories in our timeline. The other card types you'll see on the timeline are the blue anchor points. These are special points in history that have to do with the Devron anomaly, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. Once you've got your timeline set up, you're going to want to pick your identity. In our example, we'll be playing as James T. Kirk. As you can see on the card, it requires 3 specific conditions to be met. This is the alternate timeline that we need to basically rearrange in order to win. I need to get back to my timeline as James T. Kirk, and that requires 2 specific events on the timeline to look a certain way and an artifact, which we'll talk more about in a second. In order to make sure that the time looks this way, we're gonna need the first event, 2293, the Khitomer Accords signed, to stay the same. That's this one right here. When you look at it, it's already on its blue side, which is what we see on our card. That's gonna show us that we don't want that to change. If it changes, we're gonna have to change it back. The event we do need to change is 2364. This is Picard takes command, but on ours it says Junior Lieutenant Picard assigned to Enterprise D, which is the alternate side of this card. This is a ripple point, and in order to affect it, we're going to have to flip over a specific linchpin. It shows you on here that it will flip if 2327 is on its alternate side, and that's this linchpin. In your hand, if you have an inverter card, you'll be able to use that to flip over your linchpin. All the inverter cards do the same thing. They all let you flip over any linchpin. And you can use an inverter card to flip a linchpin over to its red side, or you can use it to flip it back over to its purple side if you want to restore history. In our example, I am hopefully using my inverter to flip this one over to its red side. And we want to change history according to the card, and that's going to flip C7, which is the card that we need to be on its alternate side, and it's going to have a sort of side effect where it flips D1 as well. That might relate to someone else, but for us, we're not really concerned about that one. Now, if you look at our example identity, the only thing that we need in order to win right now are the humpback whales. The humpback whales are an artifact card. These are basically like items that you're going to be getting from throughout the timeline. So on your turn, when you play a card, you could play an inverter and change history. You can play an artifact and keep that in front of you. If it's not something that you need for your goal, you might still want to play it. But as far as the other card types that you're gonna see, I'll show you what they do. The important one that I'm gonna start with is the event cards. These happen as soon as you draw them. You will draw another card to replace it, so it doesn't take up your play or anything like that, but they force you to do something immediately. Most of them are Devron Anomaly expands, and that refers to the anti-time anomaly. You start at the end of time and flip over the anchor point to its black side. This one says anti-time disruption at the Devron system. As you get more Devron Anomaly expands cards, they're gonna ripple backwards in time, affecting the different anchor points. If you get too many of them, and this anti-time anomaly expands all the way back to the beginning of time, then life does not find a way. And that's bad. We generally like life. If it gets all the way to this point, everyone loses. Now, if you're Q, that's actually your goal. One of the identities lets you strive to erase all of time. As far as other card types go, there are the actions. Actions basically do what they say on them. So if you're not sure what it does, you can read it aloud as you play it, and the other players will also help you make sure that you're sticking with it, but they're pretty self-explanatory. Power actions are another type of card. They also say what they do on them, but power actions have some further restrictions, which will come into play depending on whether the card says it affects an action or a power action. This power action is invitation to join the queue, which is another fun one. If the Devron anomaly has expanded all the way and no one is playing his queue, you can play that power action in order to win, which is just really fun if you ask me. The other type of card you might see is an assignment. It looks a lot like an artifact because it uses those, but mostly what it's gonna let you do is draw 2 cards. It says on there, step 1, draw 2 cards. And then step 2 is if you have both of the artifacts that they require, then you'll be able to draw extra cards. Now that's a little bit easier said than done, so if you find yourself with these and none of the artifacts or only one of the artifacts, you can still use it to draw 2 cards. Being able to draw cards is pretty useful in this game, especially depending on your identity that might require you to find something specific. And assignments let you do that. Lastly, we've got fractures. These are a little bit different than other cards. Fractures represent when time gets so messed up that it doesn't look anything like what we're used to. So our example fracture is the whale ship blasts Earth. And this one says that if the whales are not in play, then you can put this on 2289. So if I didn't have the whales in play, I can put this here. If no one has the whales in play, you can put this here. Most fractures actually look like this, where you're gonna see a number of different events that are gonna need to change in order for you to place that victory. And fractures are denoted with a double hatch mark. Unlike alternate histories, which have a single hatch mark, fractures are very, very bad. Not only do I get to draw a card for playing this fracture, more as compensation than a reward, but fractures also help thwart your opponents. Any event that takes place after a fracture is now changed so much that you cannot use those to win. Like I said, it doesn't resemble any history that we've seen before. So in our example, James T. Kirk is gonna need both of his events to come after this fracture. So until that fracture is removed, I wouldn't be able to win at all. This one is dependent on the whales, and if I put the whales into play, that fracture then disappears. Most fractures, however, are going to require specific events to change, and then you'll be able to play the fracture. Once that fracture is in play, you'll have to change those events back to a more reasonable outcome in order to prevent that fracture from happening, and then remove it from the board, and possibly allow you to actually use those events that you need in order to win. There are some characters that require fractures to win, and because of that, we've made some fracture key cards that help you keep track of what the different ones are and what is required for them in case that's something you need to reference as a player. When you're first starting out with the game, you probably won't need to worry too much about fractures. We recommend using some of the basic identities in order to start out the game. You can see our James T. Kirk character only has 1 pip at the top of it. And if you look at some of the other identities in the game, you'll notice that they have different numbers of pips. This represents their difficulty level. So if you're playing with a 1 or 2 pip character, you can use this as a really good guide to get started. Some of the 3 and 4 pip characters are a little bit more advanced, and we recommend playing with the 1 or 2 pip characters first. The 3 and 4 pip characters are usually the ones that are going to require fractures. We recommend you start by playing with all characters that have the same difficulty level. When you do that, you're just going to draw 3 cards from the deck for your starting hand. If you are playing with a mixed range of difficulties for your identities, then the starting hand is going to change based on how many pips you have. Basically, how many pips you have is going to be the number of cards that you start with. So everyone's actually going to draw 3, but if we're playing with a mix of characters and I have a 2 pip character, I'm going to discard 1 of my choice in order to start out. If you're playing a 4 pip character, you actually get to draw an additional card and start the game with 4. Once you get started, remember you're going to be drawing 1 card at the beginning of your turn, and then you're going to be playing 1 card in order to end your turn. If you feel like you don't have anything that you want to play, you do have another option. Instead of playing a card from your hand, you can choose to just draw another card and add it to your hand. There is no limit to the number of cards that you can have in your hand. There are also a lot of cards in this game that are going to let you do things like look through the discard pile or the draw pile as you're looking through the past or looking into the future. So the discard pile is always public knowledge. You can look through it anytime you want in order to know what's in there. If you want to know more about the references that are in this game, there are a lot of them. If it's not on the timeline, it's represented in one of the cards, artifacts, actions, inverters. Any time travel episode or movie, any shenanigans that the crew have gone through is represented in here somewhere. And if you want to see what all those references are, you can go to looney.labs.com/Trek201 to get a little advanced history lesson on the Star Trek history and alternate histories that we studied very hard to make this game a reality. And that's Star Trek Chronotrek. Thanks so much for giving it a try. If you want to learn more about Looney Labs and our other Star Trek or time travel games, visit us at looney.labs.com or check out your local game store to find out more.